So I was teasing the good old boy who was, the team leader for the area I was in, where they were basically bolting down stuff to the floorboards. And I said, I thought you Japanese were all about efficiency. What's the deal? You put on the door twice? That doesn't seem very efficient. And he and I had been talking about Kaizen, so he said, well, we had a Kaizen team, Mark.
Welcome again to It Doesn't Take a Genius, conversation with introspective perspectives and pithy points of view. Here are your hosts, my friends, Max and Marty.
I think that's Mark and Mike.
Yeah, whatever.
Ramsey!
Oh, Marshall, I'm afraid to ask this, but what's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to tell you before we get started that I've changed my identity. I now identify as trans handsome.
Jeez.
So from this point forward, my pronouns are stud muffin and man candy. So just use those as you see fit.
Mike, you are seen, you are heard. Go ahead and move on from this conversation before it gets too weird. Hey, I got something from the mailbag, Mike.
Uh-oh.
From the mailbag.
Which of our two viewers have written in?
Well, this one happens to be Virgil, so shout out to Virgil. Thank you for this very thoughtful email. I won't read the whole thing, but basically the short story here is that he was in the conversation with a new executive of one of the vendors that his very successful organization works with, multi-site organization in the service industry, very, very successful. And they have a vendor that's a very good sized vendor, a nationally recognized vendor. And this new executive was talking about the changes that had been made immediately upon, basically this guy coming on board. And Virgil's said, this is the same conversation that I had with the previous leadership of the company back in 2017. So something happened with a leadership change that allowed some actual improvements, some innovation to happen within this vendor organization. And so here's Virgil's real question. He says, what is more important to an organization, culture or innovation? If we do not continue to evolve, we become irrelevant. We all sort of understand that, especially if you're in the service business and speak with, customers on a regular basis. And, then on the flip side, there's maybe a military model, the outsider looking in, where he says, as an outsider looking in, it looks like we're going to change the people in leadership positions often, but we're going to use internal folks that know what we are trying to accomplish and mold them into the team members we need. So he also gives the example of athletics, that you might dismantle a program and, replace the coaching staff if things aren't going well. There's a lot of examples of how this works within an organization. Is culture more important? Is innovation more important? Now, I've got some thoughts, but I want to throw it open to you before I color your thoughts, because I know how impressionable you are. The attractive people often are very impressionable. So why don't you share your thoughts?
Well, when I think of it, the first thing I think of is I don't believe they're mutually exclusive, but I do see how one impacts the other. So when you first started talking, I started thinking about that old research project where they had the monkeys in the room. And they had 5 monkeys in the room. There was a ladder. At the top of the ladder, there were some bananas. And so when the monkeys started to climb up to get the bananas, they'd spray them with cold water. Well, the monkeys would be like, yeah, they'd come back down. They wouldn't have any of that. Right. So they did it until the point where the monkeys no longer even tried to climb the ladder. So then they took one of the 5 monkeys, they took a monkey out, they put in another monkey that had never experienced the cold water. Well, that monkey went, I'm going up and get some bananas. So as soon as he went up, the other 4 monkeys pulled him down and said, no.
Don't do it.
Yeah, don't do that, right? Bad things happen. It's not what we do around here. And when you think of culture, right, that's my definition of culture. It's just how we do things around here.
How we do things.
So as the experiment goes on, they keep taking the monkeys who were sprayed out. And so at a point in the experiment, you now have 5 monkeys in the room. None of them have experienced being sprayed with cold water, and yet none of them will climb the ladder.
Yeah.
And
Boy, that's
so,
scary.
yeah, it's terrifying, right? I don't know why we don't climb the ladder,
Yep.
but that's the way we just do things around here.
Yeah,
And
boy.
so the power of culture, you can switch people out, but yeah, unless you replace them wholesale, there's a remnants of culture will remain.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So it's interesting you brought that up, because I was thinking about, this was obviously like a leadership change at his vendors organization, sort of a big sweeping change. It sounds like that was made in leadership. And I got to thinking about all the mergers that I've, either been a part of or, had a front row seat to. And they all have gone poorly for the most part. I mean, I can remember being an intern for a public utility, and they were merging with another utility, and it was just the nicest environment, nice people. Got the security officer at the front desk. We knew everybody by name, and you went up in the elevator sometimes with the president, no problem. And this merger was announced, and it was almost weekly the temperature changed. It got worse and worse. The elevator rides were the worst part, because nobody was happy. They were all getting more and more bitter, feeling like they were being treated like the country cousins, and were being absorbed into this big organization. It was awful. So anyway, long story short, I had a friend who recently went through a merger, and I saw him bragging about it. And this is months later, and I'm like, hey, months later, the temperature should have dropped by now. And so I asked him, you seem pleased with the merger. He says, yep, sure am. Everything they told us that they would do, they have done. And so I got a lesson there, which was stay in constant communication with your people about what you're doing. I talked to him a little bit later, and he said, yeah, actually, it's gotten even better, because they said they were going to be doing some research on our offices. They did do some research on our offices. It turns out, I mean, they showed us the numbers. We had some folks that were dead weight, and they left, and we're kind of glad they're gone. So he was even happy with some of these changes, but none of it would have happened without the constant communication of being able to say, this is what we're about. This is what we're trying to accomplish. So the culture changed with it. Could the culture change, I guess, is the question, to include innovation as part of the culture, right? I mean, to your point, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, but could the culture change in a way to where innovation becomes a part of that culture?
Oh yeah, when your example is filled with little clues about how they made it work.
Right.
Right, the way it was approached, the fact that just in the statement they came to us and showed us the
Right.
data that indicated that a change was warranted.
Yep.
Well, when was the last time we saw that happen?
Yep.
Where we sat down and having a civil conversation and had a nice conversation using data, using our anecdotal evidence, and figuring out what would be the best configuration for this thing.
Yeah.
And so the when you look at it, anytime you merge something, there's a reason it merged, and the reason was to gain efficiencies, increase performance. Right? Nobody buys something and merges with it to stay the same.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend $18 billion in hopes that I keep getting what I'm getting now.
Right.
No, that's not what. Yeah, they're looking for to establish right the dominant culture, the one that they think will have the best chance of success.
Yep.
And within that merger, there has to be innovation.
Yeah. So this is an expression I've heard a lot in the car business. When a manager takes over a department and things seem to be going well, you'll hear somebody in leadership say, well, new broom sweeps clean. And there's some really frightening subtexts to that statement, right? Because it's basically saying, when this broom isn't new anymore, it won't sweep clean.
Right.
And the culture will pull that leader back to the way things were before, how we do things around here. He'll be pulled off that ladder so that nobody gets sprayed, as the monkeys were. And so how do you overcome that danger zone And I was thinking about an example, in my neck of the woods that I'm sure we've talked about on the podcast before, but Toyota, right? Toyota is a good example at the manufacturing level, at least. I can't, speak for the entire organization, but Toyota is a good example of how they've made innovation part of the culture. And in fact, they have a Japanese word to support it, which has become sort of a byword in a lot of different industries, Kaizen.
Mhm.
Kaizen meaning continuous improvement or always improving. We're always going to be doing things. How we do things around here is figure out ways to do them better and eliminate waste from the system, whether it's time, money, or materials.
Mhm.
And so they have baked into their culture some ways to do that. So I know it can be done, and I think there's a few things specifically they do to make that happen. But before I go there, that was a mouthful. So let me stop, because I know you've had a lot of experience with Kaizen initiatives and things that we've done in retail organizations to help them embrace that idea of continuous improvement. Any thoughts on that being sort of continuous improvement as part of the culture?
Well, I think I saw it firsthand. 100 years ago, I toured a Toyota production facility.
Yep.
And so we got our cool hard hats on, our goggles, and we're wandering around the plant as they're assembling the Camry. And it was interesting because there were points in the tour, we're walking, and then we would stop, and they would point out, right, the place in the line, in the production line, and tell the story of
Yep.
how there used to be an extra step here.
Yep.
There used to be two more people, and they were doing work that would lead to repetitive workplace injuries, right? They had to lift heavy objects or whatever. And a member of the line team,
Yep.
right, nobody from Japan, nobody from headquarters, right? A
Yep.
member of the line team had said, hey, if we shift this over here, we could actually eliminate the need to lift these heavy objects, and the line will go faster, the cars will be built more
Yep.
consistently, and less people will be injured. And they would tell you the name of the person who came up with that improvement.
Yep.
And then you'd go down the line, you'd be looking at the whiz bang stuff, and they'd stop. Here's another
Do it
place.
again.
Right. This was used to happen here, and this person thought of this idea, and we were able to make it happen. And it's now been adopted by all our plants globally.
Right.
And so there was this celebration. So even as an outsider with just a minimal exposure to Toyota, you're on
Yeah.
this 1 hour tour, and all of a sudden you leave knowing that the most important thing that you could do in the Toyota culture was to find a way to make things better.
100%. And so here are the things that I've noticed, because I've taken that same tour. And in fact, I got to work on that line. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but for 2 or 3 days, I wore the smallest coveralls they could find because I was scrawny. And I was on camera as the model of how to work on cars without mutilating them. The mutilation, where you scratch the paint or something like that. So I was like I was getting, videoed, like taking my belt off so that I didn't have a belt buckle, things like that. It was a phenomenal experience, and enjoy that visual treat as long as you possibly can in your mind. But moving on, one of the things that I noticed was, I didn't get that tour at the point that you did, but I just noticed that the doors were put on and then taken off and put up on separate conveyor belts up above the line, and then put back down, about a mile down the line later on. And so I was teasing the good old boy who was, the team leader for the area I was in, where they were basically bolting down stuff to the floorboards. And I said, I thought you Japanese were all about efficiency. What's the deal? You put on the door twice? That doesn't seem very efficient. And he and I had been talking about Kaizen. So he said, well, we had a Kaizen team, Mark, and they timed everything. The team was made up of all the, a lot of people that work on the floor here. And we timed things and looked at different ways we could do it. And we realized that we could save, and I don't remember now the numbers, but it was like, tens of seconds per vehicle by taking the doors off and putting them back on. And also, by the way, that meant that they could get these little swivel seats and they had these petite little women that would sit on the swivel seats and kick off into the car with this big heavy tire, not tire tool, but a bolting tool, and then kick out of the car without damaging anything. Right? No doors got dinged or anything. So they saved all that material, and they also saved all that time. And I said, I bet you can tell me how much that time is worth to you. And he rattled it off. I mean, to the penny, X number of dollars per day. So, so there's a few things there, right? Well, one is, let's go down and talk to the line. They know what the heck's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And another is, let's get them involved in the solution, because they're going to be more bought into that innovation if they were a part of the solution than if we just top down said, we hired some experts from Harvard. Here's what they said we need to do to improve our line.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't last a month. But what they came up with lasted a very long time. It's so ingrained, Mike, that I have a family member who's another good old boy, a proud good old boy. And he recently retired from Toyota, and was I think it was over paint by the time he retired. And I said, there seemed like there were some quality issues in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, and he said things took a turn for the worse when the white man took over. We had to get back to the Japanese way, like we gotta keep doing those Japanese things that are Kaizen. So that's how bought in they are to Kaizen as part of the culture, to innovation as part of the culture. And I think it's because the Japanese people treated them respectfully and involved them in the decisions. And it was communication. I'll call it humility, that let's go talk to those guys and see what they are noticing. That led to innovation as a culture. So there's my big example.
Oh yeah, well, I think it's a fantastic example, and I'm still picturing the scrawny GI Joe in a jumpsuit, putting his Toyota belt on and off. I just can't get this out of my head. So when you're talking, I'm also thinking about Dr. Dan Edgar, and he taught us about innovation in the age of an organization. And so if when an organization's first founded, it's small, everything's based upon the founder's idea, the original patent or whatever.
Yeah.
And so all the innovation comes from the headquarters.
Right.
The organization grows, it gets bigger, we add layers, there's people out in the field now. It's a very complex organization. As the organization grows, less and less innovation comes from the headquarters, and more comes from the front line, till there becomes a point where almost no innovation comes from the headquarters, and all the innovation is occurring out in the front lines. The people doing the job every single day find ways to do the job better, whether it's assembling the car or selling the product or whatever it is.
Yeah.
The truly great organizations that have a culture that's humble enough, right? These highly paid people at the headquarters have to humble themselves and say, I don't have all the answers, but I can tell through reports and different things going on, there are people in our organization that have figured something out. We need to go talk to them, figure out what they've figured out, and then find out if it can be replicated across the entire organization. And we see so many organizations where it's so hard for that, especially if there's the strong founder is still in place, for them to say, I may no longer have all the best ideas. Ouch. All right, that hurts. Yeah. And that this guy that's an entry-level employee may have figured out something that I, as the founder or the CEO or the vice president, haven't figured out. And so that requires, right, it's going to happen. The question is, do you have a culture that will embrace and go seek out those innovations, or will you remain steadfast that we know what's best for the company?
So well said. It's reminding me of one of the innovations on the tour. When you take the Camry tour, there's a seat that like swivels around, and it was from a good old boy who had a bass boat. It was that was the seat. That was the seat that was the innovation. And Dan Edgar again introduced us to some scholarly research around. I think they're called the lone heroic leader versus the dialogic leader. It goes right back to our last podcast episode where we were talking about how you have to be a great conversationalist. I'm fairly certain that the CEO of Toyota is not on the Bass Pro circuit. I think I'm right about that. I may be wrong, but I think I'm right about it. And I bet that the bass fisherman, possibly not a fan of sushi. So, to each his own. But I will say that those two had to talk, right? There had to be talk between the leadership and the front line to make that innovation work. And so it's only going to work if you go have that conversation. So we're back to talking about dialogue again, which tickles me to death because I think that's a huge, huge part of what makes this successful.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, someone had to, and there had to be this culture where I felt safe offering up the idea.
Right.
Yeah, I can see it, but I'm not saying anything because they might make fun of me. They don't need to hear from me. They don't, they've let it be known that they don't want to hear from me. And so, yeah, I'm hesitant to share those ideas, but because they celebrate innovation, I'm more apt to offer up my idea. One of my favorite stories from that particular plant in Kentucky was the story that I was told was when they first set the plant up. They had some break areas, and in every break area they put up a ping pong table because that's what they had in the Japanese plants, and nobody played, and they so they asked around, so what's the deal, and the workers from the Kentucky plant said, if you'll take out the ping pong tables and put up basketball goals, you got a whole new thing going on here. So they removed the ping pong tables, put up some goals, and then on breaks, people could shoot around and just loosen up, and it relieved some stress. And it worked fantastic.
That's
so
great.
Even when it came to play and refreshing the team and keeping them fresh, they found that they're not everything translated globally, and if they were willing to listen, the solution would be readily apparent.
That's a wonderful note to end on. Back to play. I do hope that we do adopt the Japanese innovation of you can take a nap under your desk. Have you ever seen those videos where they just all right, it's 3:00, knocking out. Oh, it's beautiful. Thing of absolute beauty. Anyway.
Yeah. And I'm all for morning calisthenics.
Yeah. Good for all of us.
Before we hit the line, jumping jacks, some burpees, touch your toes, which there again, you think, what a waste of time. But they figured out, right, I've got less workplace injury if people warm up before they go to work.
Yep.
Everything is with a purpose. And I find that fascinating.
I love it. Absolutely love it. You can do little exercise routines in Animal Crossing, by the way. All right. So anyway, now moving on to our voiceover artist that we've hired for ending our shows, Mr. John Wolf. Hopefully he can save us from this awkward moment.
Yeah, and I'm willing to bet that he's never played Animal Crossing. Yeah.
That's very true.
Just thinking out loud.
And that's a wrap. It doesn't take a genius. The blog dedicated to reducing the irreducible. Next time, prime numbers. What makes them so special? Join us then. And thanks for listening.
That's good enough.